Healthcare continues to experience labor shortages. But with the right tools, organizations can create work environments that their teams want to work in. Stick around as we explore techniques for optimizing healthcare workforces. A recent report conducted by Definitive Healthcare finds that 1 in 5 healthcare workers has left the industry, and nearly 50% plan to quit within the next 2 years. Those are some seriously striking statistics. So, how did we get here? And more importantly, how can healthcare organizations better serve their teams as labor shortages continue to take hold? A significant area to focus on is to create a work environment that health professionals want to work in. A great way to make that happen is to let them have a say in when they work and to create transparency around the entire process. Today on RPI Tech Connect, we're exploring the healthcare labor shortages as well as how organizations can retain their teams and prevent burnout. To lead the discussion, we have Infor's Senior Director of WFM Product Strategy and former nurse, Brianna Zink, and RPI's Principal WFM Consultant and Scheduling Wizard, Max Fisk. Brianna, welcome to the show. Max, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so thanks so much for joining me on today's segment. As I mentioned earlier, the healthcare sector is facing a crisis with labor shortages. I'm sure this is no surprise to either of you. But Brianna, as a former nurse, what do you believe are the reasons for this? How did we get here?
Yeah, so a few things. First, I think that it's pretty apparent the pandemic kind of escalated how important or how severe the shortage is. If you kind of look back, I remember when I went into nursing school, hearing there was so much job security going into nursing because there was going to be a nursing shortage, which was many years ago at this point. So it's not like it's something that just we woke up 3 months ago and said, oh my goodness, we're in this nursing shortage. It's something we've been trending towards for quite a while. But the pandemic kind of caused a lot of nurses to leave the workforce. One, women across the board in kind of the employment marketplace left the workplace because of the pandemic. And then fewer of them have come back. I think that's also represented somewhat in nursing, and nursing is still the majority women. So I think that's kind of has something to do with it. And then the other is that nurses just across the board, it's hard to feel appreciated and valued as a nurse. I know when I was working at the bedside, I had many times where I didn't feel appreciated or valued. And a lot of that, not that it all boils down to workforce management and scheduling, but a lot of it does. It's such a draw to go into nursing and to think about working in a hospital and working 3 days a week. You have 4 days off. This is going to be great. But then when you have no control over what those 3 days are, or you're flipping from nights to days and back and forth and working the weekends and all the shifts you don't want, those 3 days quickly kind of take over your life. So I think there's kind of just a combination of, and then the aging population. So a lot of nurses are baby boomers that are getting ready to retire. We're not replacing them as quickly. So I guess kind of the pandemic, feeling underappreciated, and then just the workforce demographics are all leading us towards a worsening nursing shortage.
Yeah. And these issues didn't happen overnight. Like you said, a lot of this has been, the pandemic probably kind of sped things up, but this is a long time in the making. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So, I think I saw a statistic online that said that a lot of nurses, people who received their licenses and were practicing, have decided to put that on hold due to the working conditions. You hear that and you're like, wow, this must be a really not great work environment to be in if you made the decision to go into nursing. How many years of schooling is that? Do you recall?
Yeah, so most RNs have a bachelor's degree to become an RN. So at least a 4-year degree, but some kind of do additional schooling before that, and then additional certifications that you need depending on your unit or area.
So you figure you spend all that time, focused on this is your career, and you complete it and you're working it, and you're like, you know what, this just isn't for me anymore. You got to figure that speaks to the level of working conditions, right?
Yeah, definitely. And part of it too is it's a very emotional job. you're interacting with patients or their family members on, especially in a hospital setting, on what's potentially one of the worst days of their lives. It's not like we all woke up this morning and intended to go to a hospital or wanted to go to the emergency department. It's kind of one of those areas where a lot of people don't want to be.
It's not a good time.
And then it's also very personal too. Everyone kind of has their own healthcare journey. Your own health is very personal to you. So just the nature of it can be very emotionally draining. And in a sense, you want those nurses that are there because it's emotionally draining. You don't want a nurse at your bedside that's just completely cold and hardened to it. So it's kind of this balance to strike where you want that emotional tie because you want someone taking care of you, or as a healthcare leader, you want someone taking care of your patients that cares. But you also need to be cognizant that that caring can kind of lead to burnout also.
Yeah. And just to clarify real quick, you said going into this, the 3-day work week, 4 days off sounds good, in as an idea, but when in practice, it can quickly overwhelm your life. How long are those shifts typically?
Yeah. So typically it's 3 12-hour shifts is still kind of the standard, which I'm curious to see if healthcare is trending towards maybe being a little more flexible there.
Okay.
When I was fresh out of school in my early 20s, that worked wonderfully. But thinking about different stages in your life where maybe you have young children at home or, just other responsibilities, sometimes a 12-hour day that, you got to commute there and back. There's a lunch break in there. So really it's at least a 12.5-hour shift plus the commute. Every waking moment on those 3 days that you're working is kind of committed towards working. And then I know from my perspective, we had kind of what we called self-scheduling, but I would select my shifts and then the schedule would be published and it looked nothing like the shifts I'd actually selected.
Oh,
so your life on hold to wait until that schedule came out because you can't plan something when you're going to be working every waking moment on that particular day. So that's kind of what I meant about the 3 days aren't always as great. With the staffing shortages, just about every nurse out there is picking up additional shifts. I know even, 10 years ago, I was working 1, 2, usually 2 at the most, but 5 12-hour shifts in a week is a lot. That's
insane. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds exhausting. Go ahead, Max.
You've got things you have to do, like pick up, drop off, sports, anything like that, in your personal life. A 12-hour shift pretty much takes care of that entire day. If you're working an 8-hour shift, you can at least take, the drop-offs or maybe the pickups. But a 12-hour shift pretty much takes the whole thing. So it is huge that 12 hours of your life on that one particular day, you're not really accomplishing much else but work. So picking those days and working, right. Yeah. And then you go to sleep and then you wake up and turn around and do it all over again. And that's if you're, on night shift to night shift or day shift to day shift. Mm-hmm. If you're switching from one to the other, it can be pretty brutal.
Mm-hmm.
So this is great because now I think we've made it crystal clear that there's a problem here. And for today's segment, I'd like to explore how organizations can better cater to their staffing needs. And Max, this question for you. As someone who started their career working at one of the most, well-known hospital systems in the country, I'm curious to hear from your perspective, how can, businesses create a more desirable work environment? What can they do?
Yeah, and Bree, you can back me up on some of this, but you made a really good point on that self-scheduling. Folks would self-schedule, and self-scheduling has been happening long before WFM applications have been doing it. It's been on green sheets or on the wall or on a whiteboard or wherever it is. They're doing it. But then once it comes out, once it's published, it may not look anything like what you've selected. And that could be for, multiple reasons. When we're talking to, schedulers and nurse managers and everybody, when we're doing discoveries and building out self-scheduling applications for people, the reasons that people balance shifts out and move people around, some of them make sense. Some of them can kind of often be unfair. You might get a couple of your shifts moved because somebody else didn't pick up their minimums. Or somebody might have tried to stack their schedule and put all their shifts in the first couple weeks and then open up the last couple weeks so that they can have a whole week off. It sometimes can impact other people. And then the tools themselves can also impact that. And that when you're kind of transitioning between what folks are signing up for and what you're balancing, when the manager's balancing things out and making sure that they've got the right head count, they might have to move people around quite a bit in order to get those numbers correct, because they may not be communicating, or they may not be able to enforce minimums and maximums. So if you have a system that makes sure that people aren't picking up too many Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday shifts so that everybody can have a 5-day weekend, then people will stack their schedule that way. People will do it. It happens. And that kind of comes back to shoot them and other people in the foot. It, kind of impacts that. So any number of reasons that self-scheduling turns into something like preference scheduling. But a good workforce management application for self-scheduling particularly can really help with that. Because if you can, and in some institutions, I know at Hopkins, sometimes they're 6 or 8 months out, especially if it were a holiday calendar or a holiday period, people were scheduling very far in advance. And you build plans around that. You attend weddings on those schedules. And there's the concept of a roster day off, where within a 6-week schedule period, you can select 2 days that you absolutely don't want to be scheduled. But if your unit is staffed properly, if people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, schedulers and managers have the resources and the tools that they need to balance out and maintain schedules. People are less likely to call out for their shifts. People are less likely to have to get called in. On call is less used. Travel nurses are less used, agencies. So there's a lot less of that up and down, which causes people kind of makes that flip between self-scheduling and preference scheduling, where you go from, picking the schedule that you want and typically ending up with it with a good system, to picking the schedule that you want, and then, like you said, looking at it at the end of the period and it doesn't represent anything of what you wanted. Because you balance your whole life around that, and the time period between you selecting those shifts and you seeing actually what you ended up with can be a couple weeks too. So you make plans around what you pick up, and then you see what you actually ended up with, and you got to redo all those plans.
That sounds tough. Yeah. Self-scheduling as a concept sounds like it's something, though, that gives, nurses and other people working in healthcare more control over their lives. And I can see how that can create more autonomy, especially if there's transparency around it and things are being adhered to. But Max, we touched on this briefly in our other discussion, the power of self-scheduling. But it sounds like there's some other maybe new tools on the horizon, like shift bidding and billboard manager. First of all, what are those tools, and what can we expect them to how can they help teams?
So I can speak to what Infor has, and Bree, you can back me up on what's on the horizon and what's coming. But Infor currently has a billboard tool and a self-scheduling tool, and the two are kind of designed to be used at different times. Self-scheduling is designed a couple months ahead. We're creating schedules, we're building minimums and maximums, and we're trying to balance our schedule out, right? We've got daily quotas. We've got the, X number of people that we need here and there, and they need this skill and they need that skill. So you're building out your unit quotas, essentially who you need. And then you're building out employee quotas to make sure that each individual is selecting what they need to select within that 6-week period, so that you can kind of have that balance. So those self-scheduling tools, when, built correctly and maintained, they can generate 80-90% of somebody's schedule for them. And then the balancing is where the billboard kind of comes in. So when you're balancing your schedule and you're looking for folks to pick up additional shifts, or if you're more present and, folks are calling out or they're having last minute leave, things like that, you're using the billboard tool then to send those shifts out. The rules are maybe a little bit more relaxed. People can pick up additional shifts, maybe more than 36 hours per week. So we don't want people to schedule themselves into overtime when they're building their schedule. However, when we have a shift that we need filled now, I may or may not care if that puts you into 60 hours. We kind of need it filled at that time. So the billboard allows for kind of a more immediate response to those shifts. And the self-scheduling tool has had a lot of good advancements from the end user perspective. So from the nurse's perspective, how they're interacting with that self-scheduling tool has changed a lot in the last few releases. And I think has drastically improved that experience and made it much easier for folks to pick up what they want and, more likely to end up with it when the schedule is published. And the Billboard tool is getting a lot of advancements as well. Something recently that just came out was the ability to bid on shifts within the Billboard. So if a shift is posted out there, several people can go in and place a bid on it, depending on whether they belong to a particular group or whether their credentials meet what is required for that shift. And then managers or supervisors can go through the process of awarding that shift out to somebody, depending on any different factor that they can come up with. So I think those two tools really lend themselves to folks picking out, they get to pick their schedules. They get to build out what they want, which in turn increases staff satisfaction and reduces call outs. That's something that they've observed over time in that, if you get called in to work what you're hoping to work, you're less likely to call out essentially.
That makes sense too. And this idea of shift bidding. So is it, do you see that kind of activity happening around shifts that are maybe quote unquote more popular or more desirable to work? Like what kind of situation do you see that being most effectively used?
It comes in two parts. For an end user, for a nurse, you can kind of cast a wider net potentially. So you can bid on lots of shifts that you would like to work. And, you can bid on potential shifts that would throw you into overtime or would put you in a situation where you maybe wouldn't be able to work that. But it allows you to kind of place a bid on a lot of variations of shifts. So you can request or you can place a bid on 12 different shifts and end up with 3 of them. So it allows the end user their nurse to cast a wide net. It also benefits the manager and the scheduler quite a bit as well, and that they get to choose potentially who ends up with that shift. So if it's something that's going to put someone into 60 hours that week, or if it is going to trigger a bunch of different differentials, or if it could potentially cost somebody more money, or more importantly, put somebody into a situation where they might burn out for picking up too many shifts, they have the ability to award those shifts out to people depending on a lot of different things, their skills, their current schedules, agency status, lots of different things like that. So it tends to benefit both groups when used. So that is a big advancement on that end there.
Nice. And so it sounds like folks on Cloud Suite WFM have some really helpful functionality to look forward to. So I have to ask though, so some of these things are newer than others and more is on the way, but how has Infor gone about introducing these features? Were they requested by clients, years in the making? What's the story?
I have some personal references and stories about that for sure. But Bree, if you want to start on this one, I think you are probably more in touch.
Yeah, so it's kind of a combination of we definitely take into account that client feedback and kind of there's various ways customers can do that, whether it's an enhancement request or we have different kind of user groups and ways that we interact with customers to also understand it may not be an enhancement request where that's, I wish this worked this way, but it may be, I have this idea that is just kind of a net new idea and would be really great. So we take into account kind of that client feedback. We also do a big part of my role is kind of understanding what's going on in the marketplace and looking for trends that I'm seeing and kind of trying to think of ways that workforce management as a whole can kind of work towards that vision of really making scheduling and time tracking better for employees, with ultimately the end goal that it's more and more hands off. So nurse managers aren't spending as much time doing the things like Max said around the balancing. So kind of a combination of what's happening in the marketplace, what our ideas are, feedback from customers, ideas from customers. And then there's also an element of kind of looking at what others are doing as well, because we also want to make sure that we're staying competitive in the marketplace.
Sure. You gotta love that Infor has an ear to the industry too. It's it sounds like they're being more proactive and like giving customers what they want to better use these applications. And I feel like that's been a theme that at least, here at RPI, we've kind of seen over the last year is that that's been a priority. And I know that at Infor Connect, that was one of the things they kind of, spotlighted was soliciting and acting on customer partner feedback. Does that sound right?
I was going to say, I'm glad you kind of circled back to that because I missed a huge one, and that's that partner feedback. So I know me personally, like Max is one of my go-tos. And as he was talking about a lot of those things, I was thinking, he's talking so great about what the solution can do. And the solution does have a really robust breadth of functionality, but the solution that spans an enterprise like that is also only as good as it is configured. And I think Max and RPI as a whole does such a great job of kind of talking through like how he was talking about balancing the schedules and kind of how you can restrict everyone from picking up Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's really an art, because if you restrict it so that not everyone can pick up Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you also have to make sure that you're not restricting it too far where people go in and there's no shifts available. So it's really takes this kind of comprehensive understanding from Infor and what we're offering and partners like RPI and having someone like Max at the table to understand kind of how that process works downstream, and then understanding the customer's processes and kind of their culture as well. So yeah, but definitely partners and people like Max that are also getting that feedback from customers and really in the solution are a big driver of that as well.
Very cool.
Thanks.
That's good to hear. We like to hear that, Brianna. Thank you. More of that.
Yeah, and from my experience, that one of the things that makes Infor WFM so powerful is its flexibility. So, as an organization and me as a consultant, I can do quite a bit with the core configuration. We can build extensions off of the product if we need to, but the core configuration allows us to build out, and use many different tools in many different ways to accommodate for an entire institution. So every scheduling unit can do something different. They can have their own set of rules, incentives, and, Chris, like we were talking about last time, with, the shortage as it is right now, every scheduler and manager has their own incentive program. They've got their own tips and tricks as to how they need to keep their people. They don't want people to quit. So they're incentivizing people, and the system can help with that. So we can go from unit to unit, department to department, and build out, really different tools that allow people to do those things. And, it's my responsibility as a consultant representing, Infor, that if I continue to build something that a lot of people are requesting, even if it's something that, requires a little bit of work, if it's something that we can build into the core product that would make an implementation faster, that it might make the tool easier to use all around. If it's me, changing a couple screens to look differently or to, maybe act a little bit differently, but the core functionality is still there. It's my responsibility to go to Infor and talk to them and tell them what I've seen. And then, they can cooperate with other consultants and other folks in the industry and with Bree and everybody, and then make a decision as to whether that should be in the core product. And honestly, more often than not, good ideas get filtered through multiple different customers. And then you kind of find out that, the one or two people that you're working with, the one or two organizations that you're working with at the time are not the only people that want that. So it's important for people to speak up and talk through that stuff. And it's important for customers to tell us what they like and what they don't like, because oftentimes they're not alone, and it gets built into the core product. And, that's what we've seen over the last, few years with Infor, is that they've really been listening and building a lot of that stuff in there, that it's helped exponentially.
Bree, you want to go ahead? You got something?
So I was just thinking, one of the things that we've really been at Infor kind of focusing and talking about is that the kind of traditional vendor idea has somewhat gone away, because we are always continuing to build on these solutions and continuing to improve them. And with, multi-tenancy cloud, customers are always on that most recent release and trying to adopt these new features. So it is just this big ecosystem that lends to that overall success of how that looks for each customer, rather than just kind of installing some software and walking away. But I feel like Max really explained that with kind of how that process works.
I love that you called it an art too, right? Like it's not just installing the software and walking away. It's understanding the culture of the company, understanding their needs and helping them get the most value out of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Especially
Yeah.
people think I'm crazy, but I truly believe that workforce management and the workforce management processes and practices, especially at a healthcare organization, are really tied to the culture of the organization. Like, do they do self-scheduling or not? Do they allow nurses to swap shifts? Max was talking about the shift billboard from the manager posting them, but employees can also post to a shift billboard, which then kind of provides more cohesion across that workforce to be able to fill those shifts.
Right.
Really
So instead of people just not showing up,
yeah.
they can work with their coworkers to find coverage.
Yep.
If you can't work today, maybe you can work tomorrow or the next day. So enabling them to be able to see their coworkers' schedules and see what other folks are working so that they can make that decision. They're not calling around, they're not texting people, and they're not just flat out calling out. They're working, with each other because they want to support the people they work with. And they realize that if they call out, then that's going to put other people in a bad situation. So, it's people helping each other out, but putting them in a situation where they can, is important.
Exactly. Healthcare is so tough because it's so important that you're staffing and scheduling around the clock. Like patients don't stop needing care because it's 2 a.m. on Christmas morning.
Right.
I think that collaboration that you were just referring to is key to getting those nurses and those frontline staff that flexibility and that control in a way. Because you're right, you can't just not show up you can, but you shouldn't just not show up.
You're doing your team dirty when you don't show up.
It is a pretty uncool thing to do. So, it's not like your chair is just empty that day. Someone's going to have to do your work, and that's going to make the job exponentially more stressful. That's already stressful. It's when you talk about doing a really hard job, having your support system be the your coworkers, be your team, be the people that you work with every day. And when people are kind of using cutthroat tactics for self-scheduling to push other people out of shifts, or when they're potentially gaming the system, or one of the things that you said early on in the episode, Chris, was just transparency. And giving people the opportunity to do the right thing. And that's what I kind of repeat over and over and over again to customers, especially when they want to build huge rules, all these roadblocks and rules that prevent people from doing things, because yes, it will stop people from doing what you don't want them to do, but it might also hinder the process. The more roadblocks in place, the less complete of a schedule that you're going to end up with. So I try to implore people that with this level of transparency, trust your people, and they will more than likely do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to say, we've been talking about how Infor has been doing a great job of soliciting feedback from clients and partners and user groups. And this is something that's been happening over time. But I think that the results of those efforts are beginning to bear fruit. For those of you listening in today, this will be in the show notes, but a Nucleus research report recently shows a WFM technology value matrix, and it has Infor WF in the greater usability and better functionality quadrant. That's the top right one. It's the best place to be, and it's got it sitting right next to other dominant players in the space like UKG. And so I think this is a testament to the product and what it's delivering. And, it's just awesome to see, like, we're talking about it here, but like other third parties are recognizing it too. And it's becoming like a more dominant, option for workforce management.
Yeah.
It's pretty wonderful when Infor hires folks like Bree with a nursing background to help drive the product.
Yeah.
Who'd have thunk hiring a nurse?
I was going to say, what a smart hire that was. How long have you been at Infor now?
So total 7 years, but I was hired by Infor 9 years ago. I'm a boomerang.
Nice.
So I went to a competitor and came back because I missed Infor and I missed the people, missed the solution. So
that's great to hear. They have there's really good statistics out there about boomerang employees, actually, like leaving and coming back, like that second, like, re-entering into the organization, like you're more focused, you're more driven, like what you want. You made a decision to come back.
And you've seen what the other side looks like.
That's very true too. So we've been talking about, what's going on in healthcare and how WFM can help with, solving some of these issues. But I have to ask, WFM, it's not a new product. Maybe the name it did a rebrand or something, but like, what's the history there? How did the product evolve into what it is today? And what can you share there?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because workforce management started out as WorkBrain, which was a really great time and attendance solution headquartered in Toronto, Canada, that was founded in 1999. So 25 years ago at this point. And then Infor acquired WorkBrain in 2007, really seeing kind of the value of extending that traditional ERP to include, the workforce management and more of the people aspects of it. And then in 2014, in my mind, this really signals kind of when Infor shifted and started putting a lot of focus on the healthcare functionality around workforce management. They acquired a company called Grasp. And Grasp is now the evidence-based methodology that powers a portion of our workforce management for healthcare solution, which is called clinical science. It leverages documentation happening in the electronic medical record, or EMR. And it essentially kind of measures how long it takes to care for each individual patient based on that unique patient's documentation happening in the EMR.
Wow.
So from that, you're able to staff across the different units based on those real-time patient needs. We're able to help kind of automate that nurse-patient assignment process to make sure it's fair, safe, and equitable, so that you don't have one nurse with a really light workload and another one just kind of drowning in tasks. So I'd say that is really kind of when a lot of that focus shifted to understanding what's needed in healthcare, and that healthcare specific functionality that's now been built into workforce management. And then there's a lot of things, like a lot of the stuff Max was talking around with the shift billboard and the shift bidding. We see other industries leveraging them as well. So healthcare is a very complex industry as far as the nuances to scheduling, but then a lot of the other industries that we're in benefit from those complexities as well.
I appreciate that background. It's I would not have guessed that it, got its start back at, 25 years ago in 1999. That's actually when RPI was founded. So it's as old as us.
Match made in heaven.
I think so. Yes.
It's destined to be.
So, hey, look, we're getting close to time here. And before we wrap up, I'd like to ask my guests, a very important question. Max knows this question. He knows it well. But Brianna, this is your first time hearing it, but if you could offer today's audience one actionable takeaway based on today's conversation, what would you share?
You know what? Max's comments about how kind of the healthcare staff will do the right thing and will pick up the shifts and cover the shifts for each other, I think I've been hearing it in some other conversations I've had, and I guess I'd summarize it as assume good intent. I think
Nice.
As so many organizations are going through these big projects that impact the culture, I think it's really important especially in healthcare and nurses, as part of showing your appreciation to them, to assume good intent. They're there to care for patients and they're there to make people's lives better. So I think we need to come from a place where we're assuming that they're going to work to get those shifts covered and they're going to work together to make sure that patient needs are taken care of. So I think assume good intent was what I would tag on for today.
I think that's generally good advice, period, too. Like just having that outlook and assuming that people have, want the best that's great. Thank you. Max, what you got, man?
Doubling down. I'm going back to don't suffer in silence. I'm going to shout out to my two nurse mentors back at Johns Hopkins, Juanita Spenko and Mary Barnes, in that they always say don't suffer in silence in these instances. And I want to say that this is, what Infor has been doing over the last few years, really the last few months as well, lends itself to this. If you're having difficulty with something, if you are stuck with a tool that may not work, if you're stuck with this tool that may not work, speak to somebody, put in an enhancement request, reach out to your Infor partner. If you're wondering what the tool can do, there's lots of documentation out there. You can reach out to anybody and ask. If you want to know whether or not it can do something, ask. If you want it to do something that it can't, let us know. That we're here to listen and we want it to work. We're in a weird situation where, there's a lot of us out here, partners and Infor, who are designing a piece of software that our goal is for it to be used as least as humanly possible. We want our users to get in there, do what they need to do, and get out. And we need help with that. So, let us know. Don't suffer in silence. Speak up.
Speak up. Yep. Speak up. Awesome. I appreciate the double down. It's good feedback too. Anyway, for those of you listening in, thank you for stopping by. It's we always enjoy hanging out and chatting. If you have a question about today's segment or about Infor WFM, we invite you to contact us at podcast@rpic.com. Again, that's podcast@rpic.com. This is RPI Tech Connect, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.